Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Money Talks with Attorney Coral. I am Attorney Coral Pleas, the host of the show. This show is sponsored each and every week by Columbia Savings and Loan Association, and I always like to say thank you, Columbia. Shout out to Columbia for sponsoring the Money Talk show every week. We are coming to you on WNOV radio, which is 860 AM and 106.5 FM. And thank you for joining us each and every week when we talk about different topics, anything that relates to money. Particularly this past month of April, because April is Financial Literacy Month. We've been talking about various topics that relate to financial literacy. We had one of the employees of the bank, Mr. Gulbaz Gill, who is the executive director of lending and finance, with us, I believe, twice in the month of April, talking about issues. In particular, we talked about equity and what that means and why it's important and how it can serve you. And most recently, when he was on, we talked about businesses and why is it good to start a business and what does it mean to operate a business? All good financial topics. And most recently, we had Dr. Mose Fuller on the show. Dr. Fuller is one of the board of directors for Columbia, and I believe he's been on the board for going on 6 years now. So he's got a lot of knowledge and a lot of background that's always helpful. He's been associated with Columbia Savings and Loan Association for more than 30 years. So he has a wealth of knowledge and backstories that always are interesting and fun to talk about. And most recently, when we had him on, we talked about the psychology of having a black bank. And I really enjoyed that conversation and that topic in particular. I thought about a lot about that since last week when Dr. Fuller was on. Um, the psychology of having a black bank. I'd probably like to bring Dr. Fuller back again to even delve deeper into that topic. I know when we had a black president, a lot of people used to talk about the psychology of having a black president of the United States. I'm referring to, obviously, we have a black president of Columbia Savings and Loan Association, Mr. Ernest Jones, our fearless leader, reluctant leader, but a fearless leader nonetheless, in charge of the bank. So we are on our last week of the financial literacy month of April. Well, because this is the Money Talk show, we talk about different financial related topics each and every week. But for this particular week, I was trying to decide like what sort of issue should we bring to talk about for the last week of financial literacy month. So what I've noticed is that some of the recordings of this show that are on YouTube have been shared on Facebook and even on YouTube. So I can see when people make different comments and I read them all. And I appreciate all the support because it shows us that what we're doing is we're bringing information to the community that people find useful. So I'm happy to know that. And so the comments and the feedback are helpful. And if ever I see them, I read them all. So I do appreciate the support and I want to thank everyone who does take the time to watch the show. But there's one topic in particular that I've covered before, but I've seen it in the comments that people are asking that I talk about that topic again. So that topic that people have been requesting has been anything related to credit and credit scores, how to improve a credit score, what is a credit score, why is a credit score important. All of those different types of issues have been what I've been seeing that people are inquiring. So I thought that I would take this last week of financial literacy month and just review the topic of credit. So if some of you have heard me talk about this before, it'll be review. And if people who haven't heard this topic before, hopefully it's new information that will be helpful information. So that's the goal here, just to provide information to the community that is educational. And with that being said, I would like to invite callers to call in because if there's anything you would like to add to the topic of discussion or anything that you would like to share, please feel free. give us a call. The number here is 414 444 5250. That is 414 444 5250 or 5253. Feel free to join in the discussion because I am going to talk about credit today. Got a lot of requests for that. So let's be real basic in terms of how we start off. What is credit? Okay. Um, I literally looked up a definition of credit so that I'm going to give you what I found. Credit is the trust that allows one party to provide money or resources to another party. Okay. And what is a credit score? You hear people throw these terms around, but what does that mean? The most basic definition of what is a credit score. A credit score is a 3-digit number that is typically between the range of 300 to 850, that is designed to represent your credit risk or the likelihood that you will pay your bills on time. Creditors, now those are either the people that you owe or the people potentially that you would owe if they extend credit to you. Creditors look at your credit score as a factor when deciding whether or not to approve you for a new loan. And they may also consider your credit score when determining what your interest rate may be in terms of paying back that loan. Um, what is considered a good credit score? All right, I'm going to go through the ranges. And again, this isn't written in stone. There's different charts that, these numbers may vary depending upon which chart you're looking at, but just in general, okay? If your credit score is between 300 to 579, then that's considered a poor credit score. So 300 to 579 is not good. A fair credit score goes from 580 up to 669. 580 to 669 is generally considered a fair credit score. Now, what is considered a good credit score? If your score is between a 670 and a 739, that is generally considered a good credit score. That's 670 to 739. If your score is between 740 to 799, then that is considered to be a very good credit score. 740 to 799, very good credit score. And an excellent credit score is 800 and up. So 800 to 850 is considered an excellent credit score. So I did some checking just to see what is the national average for people's credit scores. And what I found in researching that narrow topic, that the national average credit score is 695. So if you look at the range that I just gave, a 695 would fall in the category of a good credit score. 695 is the national average. The good score ranged from 670 to 739. Today, I'm going to talk about the 3-digit credit scores because that's the system that I think most people are familiar with, what I've just described. And I think that most people are also familiar with the 3 main credit bureaus. So again, I'm not saying that these are the only credit bureaus. In fact, there are others. But the 3 most well-known credit bureaus that most creditors report to is either Experian, Equifax, or TransUnion. Some creditors report to perhaps one of the 3. Sometimes creditors will report to 2 of the 3. And sometimes creditors will report to all 3. And I guess that can help you or hurt you depending upon what they're reporting. So if they're reporting good credit, you would love if they would report to all three, because then you're getting good credit reporting to all three. If you're not having such good credit, you maybe wouldn't want them reporting to all three, but you don't really get a say over that. That it just depends on which company the creditors are choosing to report to. Um, so each of the credit bureaus calculates a score for you based upon the information that is on your credit report. So, whenever I come to this is where I take the opportunity to encourage people to at least once a year pull a copy of your credit report and just take a look at it and see what's on there. I say this all the time, and this is a quote that I've read attributed to Peter Drucker, but he says he never said it. But anyway, neither here nor there. The quote is manage what you measure. So, in other words, you can't take charge of your credit history if you don't pull your credit report. You can't fix things on there that maybe need to be fixed if you don't pull that report. You need to see it. You need to see what's on there so you can see, is it accurate? Is it true and correct? Is it really your credit that's reporting? Do you have a name that's similar to someone else's name? Is it a relative that maybe has a similar name to you? I've said this before many times, but I've seen it. A lot of times when there's a father and then he has a son that bears his name, he's just Junior. So, John Smith and then John Smith Jr., you better check those reports to make sure that there's nothing that's misreporting between two people, especially if they have addresses in common, as relatives tend to have, at least at some point in life. Now, sure, they'll have different social security numbers. They might even have different middle initials, but human error is what it is. And sometimes you've seen it where one person's credit gets reported on another person's report. Now, it doesn't have to be a family member. You may have a very common name. What if your name is Michael Smith or Michael Johnson or something like that? That's a fairly common name. There may be another person who's out here that has a name similar to yours, and I don't know exactly how the wires get crossed, but I've just seen it happen where you see one person's credit reporting on another person's report. So this is why it is important to pull your credit report at least once a year. I know people who look at their credit reports on a monthly basis because they don't want anything to get too far out of hand. But annually, I would say, is the minimum. And why do I say that? Because you can get it for free. It doesn't even cost you. It's just the time that you take to make the request. You can go to www.annualcreditreport.com. That is www.annualcreditreport.com. Or you can call 1-877-322-8228. That is 1-877-322-8228. And you can request a free copy of your credit report. And I do believe that you will get that report for all three credit bureaus: Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. Get those reports, sit with them, take a look at them, and make sure that if there's anything on there that is not accurate, that you dispute it. Go ahead and challenge it. You want to make sure that that information is accurate, because it can affect you when it's time to when you come time where you need your credit in order to get some sort of a loan or financing, something that is for the benefit of your future or that of your family, whether it be a home or a car, or something else. These factors are considered. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about how the credit bureaus, what are the ingredients that they look at when they're determining these 3-digit scores. There's formulas that they use, and best I can tell, it's a little more art than science, but I do know how they break it down in terms of percentages, in terms of what they look at. So let's take your credit score, like the total of the categories that they look at, as 100%, and pretend that's a pie, and then you divide that pie into sections. 35% of that pie, that 100% pie, 35% of it is the payment history. So that is the single most important factor that the credit bureaus look at when they are determining what your 3-digit credit score is. What is this person's payment history? In other words, do they pay their bills on time? Um, do they pay them on time every month? Are there some times when they're late with their payments? Are they 30 days late sometimes? Are they 60 days late sometimes? Have they been 120 days late at times? How long ago were those delinquencies? Was it 5 years ago that they paid, 4 months late, or was it just earlier this year? So they look at all of these different factors um, to get a feel for what your payment history is by determining whether you pay on time and how regularly you pay on time. They also look at, within this same category, the different types of accounts that you have. So maybe you have credit card accounts, maybe you have retail accounts, maybe you have a mortgage loan, maybe you have an installment loan, such as a car loan. Maybe you have public record or collection items, such as foreclosures or lawsuits or wage attachments. Um, they also, and I've kind of mentioned this already, but they look at the details on your late or your missed payments, such as how late were they? How recently did those delinquencies occur? How many are there? And they also look at how much is owed. So all of those factors are taken into account when they are considering your payment history. That makes up 35% of your FICO score. Now, there are the people that have the highest ranking, if you will, in this particular type of category have most of them, about 96% of them, have no missed payments at all. Only about 1% have collection listed on their credit report, and almost none of them have a public record listed on their credit report. So those are the people that get the highest score in this very, very important category that makes up 35% of your credit. The next largest category that they consider is the amount of your debt. The amount of your debt takes up 30%, makes up 30% of this 100% score that I've been talking about. Um, and there's some details that I want to get into a little bit that relate to the amount of debt category. But it looks like we're going to need to take a break here for a moment. Um, but what I'll do when we come back after the break is I'm going to pick up right there talking about the amount of debt, the 30%, the other large portion that's considered when they're determining what your credit score is. Thank you so much for listening. This is Money Talks with Attorney Coral. Feel free to join in the conversation after the break. The number here is 414-444-5250, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Money Talks with Attorney Coral. I'm Attorney Coral Pleas, the host of the show, and again, just thanking you for listening. Today, we are continuing the series of financial literacy for the month of April, and in particular, today we're talking about credit scores, credit reports, and um, I'm giving information that I hope is helpful to everyone who's listening about how to do some things to pull your credit report, review your credit report, and fix some things on there. If you don't like what you see, there's some things that you can do in order to make improvements. So, one of the things that we were talking about right before we went to break is how the credit bureaus rate your credit. How do they come up with these 3-digit scores that you see? And the first thing that we talked about is that 35% of what they consider is your payment history, and 30% is what they look at is the amount of the debt that you have. So that's what I wanted to talk a little more detail about now that we're back from the break. What does that mean that 30% of what they consider is the amount of your debt? Well, they look at the total amount of debt that you owe across all of your accounts. So generally, your total balance on your last credit statement shows up in your credit report. Depends on what time of the month. Let's say if it's a credit card, it can depend upon what time of the month that credit card actually reports to the credit bureaus. Um, so it can be helpful to find that information out. So let's say, for instance, all right, if you want to have an impact, and hopefully I can say this in a concise way that comes across clearly. Let's say you have a credit card and you have let's keep it simple. Let's say you have $1,000 limit for your credit card, and maybe you use that credit card and you use $900 worth of that credit. Um, and that credit card company happens to report to the credit bureau on let's say the 25th day of the month. And let's say on the 25th day of the month, you're showing that full $900 balance that's owed. Well, that credit card company will then report to the credit bureau that you have used 90% of your available credit. Well, the credit bureau doesn't like to see that because they'll think that, well, this person they have used 90% of the credit that's extended to them. Um, they must not be financially doing well, or they may have had some sort of emergency. The credit bureaus prefer to see that you're using, and again, this varies depending upon who you ask or who you're reading from, but anywhere between 10% to 30%, but no more than 30% of your available credit. They don't want you to have more than 30% of your available credit already utilized. And some models say it's better if you can keep it at 10%. So again, I best explain it with the numbers. If you have $1,000 credit card limit, and if you've used $100 and that's what gets reported, well, then that's not bad. You're only at 10% of your credit usage. If you use $300, well, now you're at 30% of your credit usage. But after that, it becomes unfavorable. So if you are using 90% of your credit, then that goes against you in terms of how it is evaluated by the credit bureaus. One thing that you can do, if you're able, let's say you call your credit card company and you find out that they do report, as my example said, on the 25th of the month, and you know that. And let's say you've used $900 of that credit, but you decide by the 20th, let's just say, to go ahead and pay it down or even pay it off. But at least pay it down. Maybe you pay 800 of that $900 so that then there's only a balance of 100. So when that credit card company reports to the bureau on the 25th, they will be reporting $100 or 10% usage rather than $900, which would be 90% usage. So you can get out ahead of it and try to mitigate it if you're able to, well, you are able to call your company and see what day they report to the credit bureau. But if you're able to pay that amount down before it reports, then it can have a positive impact on your credit score, rather than if you show 90% usage of your credit, it can have a negative impact on your credit score. So I hope I said that in a way that makes sense. Um, they also consider the amount that's owed on specific types of accounts, such as a revolving or an installment account. This is in addition to the of the overall amount that you owe. Okay, so if you've got a car loan that's for $40,000, and that's what you owe, that's factored in. That's a substantial sum of money, and that's something that would be taken into account when they're looking at the amount of debt that you have. Um, they also will consider the number of accounts that you have with a balance. Um, Too many accounts with a balance could indicate a higher risk that you are overextended with respect to your credit. So just be mindful of that. If you have multiple accounts, then if you do, and let's say you want to use your accounts, but try to always be mindful of the balance that you're leaving there on a monthly basis that does get reported to the credit bureau. Um, Credit utilization, how much of your available credit are you using? Again, that's an important factor. If you are close to maxing out your accounts, you might have trouble making payments in the future. So that's what indicates to them. So it looks like we do have a caller who's holding. So, caller, please go ahead with your question or your comment. Thank you for
Well,
calling.
thank you. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Tyrone. How are you?
Blessed, joyful, grateful, thanking the Lord. How about yourself?
Doing pretty well today.
Good, good. Sounding much better. Say hi to sister for me. Good afternoon, Mr. Rideout, Mr. Carvey.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Yes, thank you. And Milwaukee surrounding area. Let's get it done, Bucks. Let's get it. Uh, couple different things for you here, real quick. The interest, a lot of the loans on the interest there, the loans, the interest is so high that this is why people are having a hard time, doing much with their money there, because not so much the original principle of the loan, but the interest is so high. But now then, how are companies positioning themselves if they're talking about, whatever kind of cryptocurrency, and, kind of uh, dabbing down the dollar bill and all that there, he talked about doing away with the penny, but, just kind of getting away from the United States currency itself, how are people, how are these companies looking to get their, the credit paid and, their bills paid with this new currency, whatever it is, cryptocurrency or whatever kind of currency is going to be. What kind of currency and what kind of, payment system are we going to have with this new kind of currency? And I'll listen to you over the air. Then have a great day and a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much, Tyrone, for always calling with good questions. I don't know a whole lot about cryptocurrency. That's something we could look into, and if we want to bring, if I can find someone that is more expert that can come and talk about that and whatever potential impact that might have um, with the economy, with the United States, then I'm open to doing that. If there's anybody listening that wants to connect and maybe come in and talk on that topic, I'd be happy to have that person to come. The number here is 414-444-5250. That's 444-5250 or 5253. You could call and leave your name and contact information with the um, wonderful people at WNOV, and then I'd be able to connect with a person who has the expertise to talk in more detail about that particular topic. So I'd have to set that aside for another day and another time, Tyrone. I'm sorry that I just don't feel equipped right now to answer that particular question. But what I will say, um, you started off in the question related to interest on loans. Um, and you indicated that the interest on the loans is high and that people have a hard time. And I'm assuming by that you mean people have a hard time making payments. I'm not sure if that's what you were referring to, but interest. It connects to what I'm talking about here today a little bit, and we when we are referring to credit scores in a way to make sure that you're paying bills on time and that you can have the best credit score that you can have, because that's one of, not the only, but one of the factors that gets considered when interest rates are being assigned. We as a small community bank that is seeking to serve primarily the central city of Milwaukee. And Columbia is an organization that historically has extended mortgage loans to those who um, maybe wouldn't always qualify. Not that everyone, because thankfully we definitely have strong credit people. We've got people with A1 credit. We've got people who pay on time. I'm not saying that we don't, but this particular bank has historically extended credits for home loans to those who perhaps couldn't get a loan at a US bank, or a larger banking institution, that if you don't have a 730 credit score, you might as well not even apply. So we have extended credit to those who maybe don't have the highest scores in order to allow an opportunity for people to become homeowners. But at the same time, there is a certain risk that is associated with extending lines of credit to those that perhaps haven't had the strongest payment history. And if that's the case, sometimes people begin to struggle with their payments, which is costly to the bank. Because one of the things that people forget is that the bank is not a nonprofit. The bank is a business, and the bank has to operate like a business, and businesses have to make money in order to sustain. And that's just basic business 001, and Columbia is no exception to that. So for those reasons, we have to, when we are evaluating loans and deals, if you present with a higher credit risk profile, those would be the people that will have the higher interest rate. Those who present with a credit profile that is cleaner, that is good payment history, that is the high credit, that has all the different topics that we're talking about today, then those people are going to get the better interest rate. And that's true of Columbia, but that's true of any other financial institution that exists, because that's the world of business, and that's just the way that it works. I say that Columbia deserves accolades because we go above and beyond, and we do extend credit to individuals who might not qualify to have that same credit extended elsewhere. So I think it's all in how you look at it. If you can say, well, you guys, the interest is too high here. Well, okay, go to Associated Bank. You won't even get in the door. They won't even take your application because your credit score isn't high enough. Or other factors, you don't have enough to get to put down. Columbia goes out of its way. We try to connect people with other resources that can help you, if you're a first time home buyer in particular, to be able to have down payment assistance. All the different programs and all the different things that we try to do in order to serve the community. I'm just asking that you factor all of that into consideration. When we're talking about interest rates, we can't really talk about it in a vacuum. We have to consider all of the parts and all of the factors that go into that. So I hope that I've answered your question. I've tried to answer it as best I can, but I do thank you for the question, Tyrone. I think that's an excellent question, and I hope that I've answered it well enough. Okay. All right, so I'm going to move on. I'm going to go back to talking about credit scores, and I was still talking about the amount of debt, but the amount of debt makes up 30% of your score. I think I'm going to move on because there's other, so far we've covered about 65% of what is factored in. I want to try to make sure I get to everything and be mindful of the time that we have here today to continue talking. Okay, so the next big topic, excuse me, the next big factor that the credit bureaus consider is the length of your credit history. That makes up 15% of your credit score. So 35% went to payment history, 30% went to the amount of the debt, and 15% to the length of the credit history. So this is an interesting one because this is something you can have a pretty quick direct impact on. um I never used to understand why people would tell you don't close out a credit card once you have it open. Leave it. Maybe use it a little bit and pay it down. Keep it low. Don't let that balance go up high, but don't cancel that credit card because once you do, the companies, in my experience, TransUnion in particular, will only leave it on your credit report for 10 years. 10 years may sound like a long time, but it goes by fast. And if if you are given a preference for having a longer credit history, in other words, how long have you had your credit established? How long have you had these credit cards? How long ago was it that you had this loan? And um, age is an important factor because if there's a longer time, longer look back window, if you will, so that they can see, well, how long has this person been in the credit world? Are they 18 years old right out of the gate and they aren't even old enough to have established a long credit history yet? Okay, that's one thing. But if you're 40 years old, you want to be able to look back and say, yes, I've got a solid credit history for the last 15 years, or hopefully even more than that. But if you have a credit card that you closed when you got that card when you were 25 years old, and now you're 40 years old and you canceled it, right, when you turned 30, then 10 years goes by and it drops off. And it's as if your credit, as relates to that particular account, is brand new all over again. So that's what needs to be addressed. Like, it's better to avoid that if you can. So if you have an account, if you can keep it open, even if it's lightly used and you make sure the payments are made on time, that is something that will build your credit, as opposed to just canceling an account because they eventually fall off your credit. And unless you've gone and gotten new accounts, then you are back to square one with respect to building credit. So let's say you've made that mistake and you have canceled your credit cards and they have fallen off your credit report and you're looking brand new out here, even though you really have had a history of having credit cards or other loans, installment loans, or whatever the case may be, but you're looking brand new because you canceled everything years ago. Then you will consider establishing new credit, whether it's applying for a new credit card or applying for some type of installment loan just to get yourself going again. But then you've got to be careful because you don't want to apply for multiple different types of loans all at the same time, because those inquiries will be looked at as well. If you've got more than two inquiries into your credit history over a short period of time, it just raises the eyebrow. It raises the suspicion, so to speak, that, hey, why is this person desperate for money? Why are they applying for all these loans all of a sudden? Maybe you're doing it just to try to reestablish or to rebuild your credit. So what I'm suggesting is be strategic about how you do that, about where you apply, about what you apply for, and about when you apply, because all of that can have a factor on your credit history. So again, the length of credit history, um, they look at the age of your oldest account. Hopefully, you've got one on there that's got some years behind it. Um, they will look at your average account age. So if you've got multiple accounts, they add them together and take the average and look at that. So if you have an account that's older and then an account that you just opened a couple of months ago, that one from a couple of months ago will bring down your average, but at least you've got an older account that's kind of, going to help to offset that. But if you've got multiple accounts and they're all new, well, then it's going to bring down the length of your credit history. Okay. They do look at the age of specific types of accounts, be it credit cards or auto loans and so forth. So it looks like we do have another caller. Caller, thank you for holding. Please go ahead.
Okay, I was wondering if um, you transfer your, well, how do you say it? If you have a credit card that you had a long length of time, if you transfer that balance to a new card, is that still considered starting over?
Well, it depends. If you are opening that new card, are you opening that new card in order to transfer the balance, or was that new card there all along?
It will. It's the same company, but they're asking you to transfer your balance to a better card.
Okay. And by a better card, you mean like maybe a better interest rate, better
Correct.
terms?
Correct.
Right. Right. So as long as you have had that card already established, then that's not necessarily new credit. If you're just
Okay.
moving it from one place to another to have better payment terms, which is probably smart, especially if you can cut the interest rate and so forth and make better terms for yourself, you might pay it off quicker or at least pay
Hmm.
it down quicker. But it wouldn't seem to me that that's establishing new a new account if you've already had that record with that company.
Okay. Yes, because I've been with them for 17 years, so and they keep asking me to transfer the
Right.
balance over. Okay.
Well, to ask them though before you do, just ask them if they're going to keep that other account open for you, and if not, if it's going to be closed, can you leave some on there, even if it's a small amount, if it's $50, if there's something you can leave on there to hold that account open, that would be my suggestion that I would ask them if I were in your situation. I would make that request.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Okay, so I'm glad that we have some callers calling in here. We definitely want to provide information that's helpful, but it looks like it is time for us to take a break. Please feel free to call us back after the break at 414-444-5250. That's 444-5250 or 5253. We'll be right back.
AURN News.
Welcome back to Money Talks with Attorney Coral. I am Attorney Coral Plus. Um, and before I go on with the continued discussion about credit and credit scores, I want to acknowledge our team at Columbia Savings and Loan Association that's there right now working hard so that I'm able to take this time and come to the radio station and share information and conversation with the community. So I just want to say thank you to Golbaz and to Danielle and Jamila and Khadijah, who are holding down the fort right now, which allows me to have the space to come here and be on the WNOV radio and talk with the community. So thank you guys for working hard and holding down the fort so that I can be here and have this exchange. Want to say hello to Latoya as well, and she's out not quite feeling well today, but we're expecting her back in action real soon. So thank you guys for holding down the fort. Okay, right back to the credit discussion and the credit scores, because two things that I want to make sure I get to. We've covered payment history 35%, amount of debt 30%, 15% is the length of credit history. New credit is 10%. Of the consideration, and the credit mix is the remaining 10%. Okay. So, for respect to new credit, the credit bureaus take into account several factors when considering the amount of your new credit, including how many new accounts you've recently opened and whether you've been rate shopping for a single loan or if you're out there applying for multiple new credit lines. They do look at that. Opening several new credit accounts in a short period of time obviously indicates a greater risk. Okay. Um, as relates to credit mix, which, as I just mentioned, is the remaining 10% that they look at, um, the credit bureaus consider different types of credit accounts being used or reported, including credit cards or retail accounts, installment loans or mortgage loans. There's other types of loans, but this credit mix will be more important if your credit report doesn't have a lot of other information to base the score on. So they want to see like what different types of credit does this person have. Um, if it's all just credit cards, well, then that's not as helpful to your score as it would be if you also had a credit card and then maybe a car loan or even a mortgage loan, which is also installment, but mortgage loans are generally considered in a different category because they're just super important. They're usually the highest debt that a person would have. Um, so, what are the ways that you can improve your credit? I'll just go over some points here with the little time that we have left. Um, Paying your bills when they're due, keep your balances low, check for errors, and make a plan to pay down your debt. So, that's all we have time for today. Again, I want to thank everyone for listening to the Money Talk Show with Attorney Coral. I'll be back with you next week, which will be May 1st, and we'll have a new topic to talk about. And again, appreciate your support. Everyone, have a wonderful week and looking forward to seeing you again.